Here we are. It is Friday. We made it. My name is Emily Gilliland. This morning I'm joined by Colin Jones.
Hey, good morning.
Good morning, Colin.
Good
two
morning.
mornings.
Yeah, 2 in 1 week.
Woohoo!
We had all sorts of commentary. You had all sorts of commentary about how ththese debates would shape up, so I'm excited to see if
Here we go. I have 5 pages of notes from last night. Are you ready?
Wow.
Are you ready?
So, have you already sort of fully unpacked the previous night and like that's done? Those notes are in recycling. We're good. We're totally focused on night 2.
Yeah, well, that's an additional 4 pages that I'm ready to access in a second, should you need it.
Excellent.
I had the great honor of getting to hang out with Joe and Jefferson yesterday to talk about the debate as well.
Nice.
So 2 days.
Okay.
This is sort of dreamy for me.
Yeah. This is
2 days of Democratic primary debate talking.
You have an exciting couple months ahead of you. Because
right?
there's another one in a month and then another one in September. There's 6 scheduled.
Yes.
So this is going to be great.
I'm so excited.
Yeah.
My life is really turning out well for me.
Yeah, excellent.
So last night, second debate, another 10 folks. I ate everything in my house last night. You watched?
I watch via Twitter and clips and live stream.
Nice.
Because I don't have television.
Yeah.
So for me, it's all about, I realized this morning I was processing it that I consume news in a really non-linear fashion, and so I often see the reaction to events before I actually see the event itself, which was sort of an interesting experience last night. Particularly, I'm sure we'll talk about, but Marianne Williamson, there was a lot of reaction, and I was like, who is this woman? And that was really charming. And there's a really great thread of it's literally just like things that presidential candidate Marianne Williamson has said, and it's really quite charming.
Yeah, she's something.
She's
a special kind of something.
She is.
Yeah, absolutely. So last night's debate, the second half of the 20 candidates, of course, there were 4 who didn't make the debates, but second 10, of course, this was considered the sort of the big table with Biden and Sanders and Buttigieg and Kamala Harris.
Mm-hmm.
We also had Colorado. Colorado had a big night between Senator Michael Bennet, former Colorado Governor John Hickenlooper, New York Senators Kirsten Gillibrand, California Rep. Eric Swalwell, author Marianne Williamson, entrepreneur Andrew Yang. So those were the 10. Who won, Colin?
Oh, Kamala Harris won, right? Like what was it? Why are you asking me? I'm supposed to be asking you who won. My money is on Kamala Harris as the big winner, with Pete, perhaps Mayor Pete as with a big gap, the secondary winner. Who stood out to you? So
I have great existential angst about last night for a couple of reasons.
Existential?
Yeah. So we've talked a lot about sort of use of language and how, there's an understanding of what certain words mean, and that's how we can all get along and stay safe. And so last night, I found myself incredibly disappointed that they didn't follow the rules.
Okay. So
the first night, as soon as Bill de Blasio interrupted, Siri's asking me if I need anything, I was disappointed. So Bill de Blasio came out and as soon as he started interrupting, he interrupted Beto O'Rourke. Like that to me set the tone, and I was like, oh man, like he's a bully, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Well, second night, the interrupting started immediately, and so as I think about it, all of these candidates agreed to the rules, a specific set of expectations of how it was going to happen. Each of them would have 45 seconds when they got a question, could respond with a certain number of seconds. And then at some point, the majority of them decided that those rules didn't matter anymore. And that what they had to say was most important, more important than whatever the person who was speaking had to say. And so it just broke into this chaos that was incredibly disappointing to me. This is so early. And yes, there is a sense of urgency about all these issues. And yes, they have a sense of urgency that they have to establish their personalities and who they are. And please vote for me and please give it to me so I can be at the second debate. Like, I get all that sense of urgency. And I think that's a false sense of urgency. It's a 2-hour debate with 10 candidates. They were all going to get a question. They were all going to have their moment to break out. And I was just super disappointed that folks got loud, interrupted each other, and decided that the rules didn't matter anymore.
Mm-hmm. I mean, to what extent do you think the rules were set up well to begin with, right? Because I think I was really struck by, there was commentary that Marianne Williamson didn't get to speak in the first 20 minutes. And so her first speaking time was 20 minutes in. But I was thinking, well, okay, but that actually just means the other candidates spoke for 2 minutes each, which is that's an opening. Like, in a lot of debates, that's just an opening statement. And so there's so many people. And, I really struggled with this both nights in just like the volume. With 10 people on stage, you're just going to lose track of a lot of people. I was looking at the speaking times for each of the candidates, and I think Andrew Yang was at like 2.5 minutes out of 2 hours. And Marianne's time picked up towards the end as she got wackier. But a lot of these candidates really got almost no traction. And I guess the advantage of having 2 nights of 10 each is that sort of what I would say the 8 front runners each got real airtime, where if you'd put all 8 on stage together, right, like Booker would have gotten no time, right, like Pete probably would have gotten no time. You would have seen sort of the lower half lose out among sort of Biden and Harris and Warren and others.
Yep.
And so I struggle with this as a format. Like, I'm like, can we maybe we needed 4 nights of 5 or 3 nights of 7 even, like, but when you sort of start doing the math on those 2 hours, subtract out commercials, right? And you're like, okay, there's 10 of us on stage. I'm Eric Swalwell, who no one has heard of. And how am I going to be heard? The temptation to interrupt is so high. And as soon as you see the leading contenders do it, right? As soon as Bernie interrupts Biden or anything like that,
right?
You just know, like, you're sitting there and you're John Hickenlooper and you're like, I'm not getting air if I don't interrupt.
See, and if they would have followed the rules, everybody would have gotten their time, in my mind.
Sure.
Because, even when you look at the speaking time of both debates, so at the most, Booker, I think, had 11 minutes the first night, but the lowest was 5. But the second night, then you had 2 minutes for Yang and the most minutes for Biden, I believe. So by obliterating those rules, starting to interrupt each other, then they were also overstepping their fellow candidates.
Yeah.
So they were not only disrespectful to the moderators, which also annoyed the heck out of me. So, each of them saying, Senator, 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 and they just kept on going. And I get it. They're trying to finish their thoughts. I don't think it had to be that way. It just was too reminiscent of 2016 and Trump. And I was just like, oh, this is not what I was hoping for.
I've never understood why moderators don't have the power to turn off microphones.
Exactly. Why didn't they turn them off?
Yeah, which is it's what we do at City Club. And candidates are warned that if they go over their time, and literally if candidates go like 5 seconds over time, we turn off their microphones.
Right.
We're very rigorous about it. And it makes like City Club as a facilitator kind of seem like a jerk sometimes, but I think it avoids the chaos. And once people know that they'll be cut off, right, in no uncertain terms, then they just follow the rules. And it
also speaks to me of preparation, because if I'm remembering correctly, I don't think Elizabeth Warren ever went over time. Always within 45 seconds. Yes. Last night, Biden said, my time's up. I'm going to be quiet. Which
so that was we should unpack
prophetic.
That
was prophetic, right?
Like, that was a whole moment. And I mean, I also want to talk about Elizabeth Warren, because there was her not going over time led to this whole viral meme situation that was fascinating to me, because again, I was seeing that before I was seeing like real analysis about how she behaved. All of this is making me think, though, like Joey's mentioning that he has the food fight clip, which as soon as you started talking about people going over each other, I was like, well, I'm sure Kamala had that like written down and was waiting to use it. So I'm wondering if we could play that.
Yeah, let's do it.
Please, we will let you all speak. Senator Harris.
We can't afford to wait for evolution on these issues.
Hey, guys, you know what? America does not want to witness a food fight. They want to know how we're going to put food on their table. Yes.
And that was it was clearly prepped. She stood back from the fray just for a few moments so that she could drop it in. But I also noticed as soon as she said, hey, guys, they all pulled back. right? Like it was very distinctive to me that she was able to interject in a way that caused other people to stop speaking. And I think that reflected her performance through the night, right? She had this very direct and commanding presence throughout the debate. Every clip I've seen, every comment, right? Like and I'm wondering if you saw, watching it in a linear fashion, if that looked as true as it did from the clips.
The issue I have with the food fight piece is she started off as the calming presence. I have an issue with saying guys because not gender-wise, they were not all gender identified as male. So I have an issue with people's, there's other ways to say it that is more inclusive.
Yeah.
So language matters. So she came across as the calming presence, but yet she did the same thing later on.
Right.
And so again, consistency, Kamala definitely had a breakout night. I'm absolutely in agreement about that. It was very planned. I think that going into it, knowing you're going to have 2 to 5 minutes, you've got those key phrases that you're just waiting. Where am I going to unleash this?
Yeah.
And so she did a great job. She took advantage of the moment for sure. It wasn't perfect. She raised her hand when she said that she would get rid of private insurance and go for a government plan, and then backed that up later on. So she again wasn't perfect, but.
There's so much to dig into. What were there other Kamala highlights for you where you were like, oh, these were really good moments? Or other like key weak spots?
Let me review my notes.
Yeah. Where in the how do you have your notes organized? Is it chronological? Is it thematic? Is it by candidate?
It's by candidate. I think that yesterday we talked about the advice we would give candidates. One of Jefferson's pieces of advice was to show emotional range, to show sort of ethos, pathos, and logos, or sort of laugh, cry, and think. So levity, intensity, and sort of that intelligence piece. I definitely think that she did that a lot. She did a nice balance of having specific plans, like day one with regard to immigration and families on the border. She would reinstate DACA. She would extend deferral for families of DACA recipients and veterans, process for asylum. So she had those policy pieces. She also, in a Pete Buttigieg kind of way, sort of went not only from the specific to sort of the bigger playing board. So with regard to climate, it's a climate crisis. It's an existential crisis, and not just we've got to, cut emissions and so on and so forth. But let's get to the moral imperative that we have around climate. I have I'm the prosecutor. Language, I think, she needs to back down from that. I'm going to be the prosecutor of the next 4 years of Trump. I'm going to be she said in her closing, I'm going to prosecute another 4 years. I think she's got to back down for that.
Yeah, it's an odd thing to double down on, particularly during the primary. I think what I anticipated when she entered the race is that she would try to minimize her role as a prosecutor. And in sort of a mass incarceration system in general during the primary, and then amplify it during the general election, right? Like, so progressive voters, by and large, criminal justice issues don't break along party lines as cleanly as some other things, but progressive voters are more likely to be concerned, I think, about her role in incarceration and in prosecution. And she was an aggressive prosecutor, right? She was not some of the reformers that we're seeing getting elected in Queens and elsewhere recently. She was a pretty hardliner, and so I really expected her to try and pull back from that, minimize that, contextualize it, and she's not really doing that at all. She's actually leaning into it even during the primary, and I wonder if she can get the nomination with that approach. Like, as other candidates start to fall away, if there'll be more attention on the way in which that feels in tension with the conversations we're having about policing and the conversations we're having about prosecution. And is she the right president to lead on that? Federal policy has in the scheme of things, a relatively small role. But if she's leaning into those narratives, right, the biggest role that she's going to have as president around criminal justice is going to be the story she tells and what she talks about and how she frames, right? Like, is it a tough on crime stance? Is it about reconciliation or justice, or right, like how you frame that? And so for as someone who's very attentive to criminal justice issues, like I kind of am ever concerned. She moved up for me last night, like pretty significantly. She was near the bottom of my list, and really kind of moved up on some significant ways. But I'm surprised by this choice that she's making of leaning into this prosecution.
Yeah. And Biden, in one of their exchanges of several, said, "Well, I wasn't a prosecutor; I was a public defender."
Yeah.
Which wasn't, he opened the door for criticism there. His response to Kamala was disappointing.
Yeah.
Because it was a quick defensive. I was a public defender. You're a prosecutor. I mean, like, case closed.
Right. I think he thought that was going to settle the situation, and I think he was sorely mistaken. Do you want to check in with Tom?
Well, let's bring Tom into the conversation. Now, for Talk Media News, made possible by our sponsor, Beth Ernest and Associates Real Estate. Beth Ernest's team of real estate brokers have been serving the Portland area for over 22 years, specializing in residential real estate, lots and land. More at bethernest.com. We're pleased to welcome Tom Squitieri from Talk Media News, talkmedianews.com. Good morning, Tom.
Good morning. What a nice morning.
Yeah.
Do you have great weather there? What are you referring to?
It is going to be, it's 90 degrees and humid.
Ooh.
It's summer here in Washington. And
Darn.
I see an ocean in my future. But it's that day that begins with the letter F. And you know how I feel about that day.
Are you headed out on vacation?
No, just a little scamp to the beach, I think, might be good before, the next round of Pentagon maneuvering begins.
Oh.
I think in the wake of the Democratic debates, it gives me a little bit of a window. Notice how quiet Iran was this week. There was some rhetoric back and forth, but, this week the G20 summit's happening and terrible stories about, from the border, of course, with poor people drowning. And there's other issues that are rising to the front, and I think that the Pentagon hopefully will be quiet at least a day to give me a chance to jog on the beach at 6 a.m.
That sounds wonderful. Who won the debate for you last night?
I don't mean to be an outlier here, but I think that winning and losing, we all lost because I dislike this format so much.
Yep.
I believe that, and if you've discussed this already, I apologize. I believe that when you have more than two or three candidates or anybody on stage, that you should have the debate divided into two parts. The first part is people ask actually the same good question to every candidate. So what's your position on this, okay? And we hear from that candidate. No filters. I want to do this. Also, you ban the use of the word President Trump or the Trump administration. Let's just talk about what you're going to do, okay, to answer the question. And then the second half of the debate, there could be, exchange between the candidates based on what was said in the first half. That way, no one could say they were misquoted. No one could say they were taken out of context. We all heard it. That's not going to happen. I realize that, and I can fantasize about that forever. So based on the last two nights, there's some candidates who know, like you were talking about Senator Harris, they knew what they wanted to achieve. And, I've mentioned on your show once before how it's interesting and fascinating to watch Senator Harris during a committee hearing, the way she questions witnesses. Not hostile, but just the way she questions them. She clearly knows the path she wishes to follow and is very well prepared. I saw that last evening. She knew what she wanted to do. She was well prepared. By contrast, Vice President Biden had to know he was going to be attacked by a multitude, perhaps, because he's the front runner, particularly Senator Harris, who had already voiced being upset with him earlier in the week about the whole busing and racial thing with the segregation of senators. He didn't seem to be ready for that or anything. And so, the contrast, you can pick your winners and losers. I think it's still kind of early.
Sure.
The point that I will throw in there, and again, if you said this already, I apologize. A lot of the issues discussed last night were issues first raised and advocated by Senator Sanders. Yet it seems that he no longer has ownership of those issues, that they've been adopted by others in the race, which often happens. So I puts him in an interesting position that he's still kind of a front runner, but he's losing support a little bit to Senator Warren now because she has a lot of the same positions. And I wonder if he becomes he fades a little bit because the issues that he's advocated are being better articulated by others, A, and B, let's not forget, he is not a member of the Democratic Party. And so there are people who might prefer someone with the same positions who's a member of the Democratic Party. So I thought that he was kind of in an awkward situation as well. And, I could go through the other 7 or 8, but we don't have time.
Yeah, and they don't probably. Well, I think
they matter to someone, but maybe not to us.
They and their families. But I think your point about Biden is fascinating, or Sanders, rather, is fascinating to me because sort of one of the things that you saw sort of in media coverage almost immediately during the debate and thereafter was these comments from Sanders campaigners and Sanders supporters sort of saying like, oh, all these ideas being discussed, they were ours first.
Right.
And I read that as really petty, right? Like it did not come across well to me as a campaign whose motto is like, not me, us, or something along those lines. Like it's this very collectivist slogan. Mm-hmm. And so then to be like, these are all my ideas and your take just hit me so weird. And so I wonder, like, when you see that, do you think, is there a path for Bernie's success?
Your point is well taken. They should have come out and said it was refreshing to see how people have listened to what we had. And now we're going to show you how to take it to the next level. In other words, take it, the reality of what happened, and spin it for your benefit. Senator Sanders, above all people in this race, now this is going to shock you because I still am, I guess, but at one point I was one of the few third-party experts in journalism, okay? So Senator Sanders, who comes from a state, Vermont, where there's a strong third-party act, in the state, there's third and fourth parties in Vermont, he should know how this happens to third-party candidates. Our Progressive Party in U.S. history, the agriculture, they're the ones that first advocated things like direct election of senators, Social Security, voting rights for women. And so when they had a good idea, it was taken by the Democrats and Republicans as their own, and they run with it. And they did that, the Democrats and Republicans, to make sure that people from the third parties would not get elected, in part, okay? Senator Sanders should know that this is the history of American politics. This happens every time there's a good idea that one of the two major parties takes it as their own and runs with it. It's smart politics on their behalf, and why not? So it's no one to blame but himself if he fails to see this happening and respond properly.
Yeah, absolutely.
That surprised you, huh?
Well, and the structure of the debate in both nights, they set up the lead candidates as sort of the first question and bringing out their ideas for either further detail, and then they ask other candidates to comment on those as well. So in the case of the first night's debate, Elizabeth Warren, are you too radical, essentially?
Right.
And then, the next couple questions, well, what do you think about all these radical ideas that Elizabeth Warren has brought out? And the same with Sanders. What do you, will the middle class pay more taxes? Well, then the next question were to other candidates, well, what do you think about Sanders' plan? So this back to the structure, not only is it not enough time to really establish much depth at all about any significant policy issue, they specifically pitted the candidates against one another to create drama and ratings, which was incredibly unfortunate.
And that's just, to get ratings and make it good. The other point that has fascinated me about the Democratic race is that the high number of U.S. senators participating. This is obviously a lot of candidates anyway, but there's a high number of U.S. senators. And so these guys have to see each other every day in the Senate. There was this great photo earlier in the week of Sanders and Warren on the plane to Miami. Both had window seats, and I think it was Sanders in front and Warren right behind him, okay? Like, if she could have kicked the seat to keep him uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But it was sort of like they see each other all the time, in the Senate. And that's another interesting dynamic as they come in for votes now in the Senate floor. Are they going to be elbowing each other a little bit for primacy or, on a particular measure as well? I like all this subterfuge.
No, I like that insight, and I want to tap into your insight with one more question before we go. But so you spend a lot of time with the Pentagon and with military types. Like, when you look at these 10 candidates from last night, do you see one or two that you think, oh, this person would really gain the respect and be able to do sort of this commander in chief role particularly well?
That's a very good question, and I'm going to answer it in this manner. Last Friday, we Pentagon reporters had an off-the-record chat with a high official at the Pentagon, and what that individual said in regards to this question is, the person he was asked about all the acting defense secretary, et cetera, and he said within the ranks, it depends on who the person is and what he or she does. It's sort of like the next man up theory. We don't care if they're confirmed or not. We care about, my words, what they bring to the table. Okay? So when your question is, I think that the military leaders will look at all these candidates. I'm not avoiding your question. I'm just setting up my answer. And look and see who can we depend on to listen to us and then make an intelligent decision. And, in that regard, I'm sure they're pretty comfortable with Biden, who's a known quality? Is it quality, I guess, right? So I think that they would defer at this moment to those people like Vice President Biden because they know them, okay, and they know the measure of them. He was the vice president. He's very good on foreign policy, let's say. And this is not me waving his flag. I'm just responding to your question. He's been to Afghanistan and Iraq. He correctly projected what would happen in Iraq, after the last war. So I would think that people like him who have that history, or at least it shows that they can learn, they would be initially more comfortable with. However, they weren't that comfortable with President Trump coming in because he didn't show any kind of history like this.
Right.
But, where Hillary Clinton did, that doesn't mean they necessarily preferred her over him. It's just their natural reaction is, who will be the best for us?
Totally. That's a great insight. Thanks so much, Tom.
You're welcome. Have a great weekend.
Look forward to talking about the G20 next week with you.
Yeah, it should be over by then.
Yeah, we'll have a lot to debrief. Thanks for joining us this morning, Tom.
Yep. Bye-bye. Talk
Media News segment brought to you by Beth Ernest and Associates Real Estate. Lots of land at BethErnest.com. Thanks as always to Tom Squitieri for joining us this morning. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to be joined by Jefferson Smith for his hot takes of last night's debate. Stay tuned. This is XRAY Radio. Radio is yours.